much for coming to my session. I'm kind of blown away. The past few years, I've looked at the speaker lineup on the Adobe conference, and it's all these superheroes of mine, and it's very humbling and such an honor to be among them this year. I'm amazed Adobe let me be here because a few years ago I took an Illustrator class, like an 8-hour day one, and by the end we had like the most simple little test to do, and I couldn't even get the first question right. But that's not a reflection on Adobe, that's completely a Mari error. So I'm very, very grateful to be here on so many levels, and thank you again. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You all look very stylish. The lights are blocking me from most of you, but front row is doing very well. So I've been thinking a lot this year about the difference between work and your job. I have had many, many jobs in my life, and I have a lot of jobs now. Something they don't tell you about being a freelancer is that being your own boss is a lot like having 20 bosses. So I have many jobs, many ways of making money, many ways of doing what I do full time. Oh, my name's Mari. Sorry, I'm Mari Andrew, and I'm an artist and writer. And those are two of my jobs. I create art, and the type of art I do is illustration, and it's all autobiographical. So I write about my experiences, my memories, my feelings, things I want to have happen to me. And a lot of those I share on Instagram. I also do some editorial work, and I'm a writer of books, and I can now say plural because I just finished my second one. So those are two of my jobs. I also do workshops and speaking. Those are the jobs. But I consider my full-time work to be healing myself. It's the hardest work that I do, and it's work I do every day, and it takes the most amount of effort, and it's a 24-hour job. So today, I wanted to talk about healing through creating, because as creative people, we have this amazing tool available to us, which is our creativity. And that's something you will always have to be able to heal yourself. I'll be talking today about the harder things that I've healed from, grief, illness, heartbreak, which I consider to be tremendously traumatic. But if you have a perfect life and you don't think that you can relate, there are a lot of littler things we have to heal from on a daily basis. I'm dealing with a bathroom ceiling leak right now, and I would say that's about as traumatic as anything. I also travel a lot. I find airports to be very stressful. That's kind of nonstop healing from those. I'm back on dating apps after a long hiatus, so that's, you just like constantly have to heal. So there's something that you're gonna have to heal from this year, I'm sure, even if your life is blissful right now. And if so, I wanna hear your secrets. I wanna talk to you. So I'll be taking you on 3 healing journeys, starting with the origin of my career, which was a healing journey. I started making art in earnest about 4 years ago. I was 28 at the time, which I thought was about 2 decades too old to start anything, but I had to do it because I was healing myself. And I think that my career was really, the career origins were really rooted in a very childlike definition of creativity. By that I mean creating without a why. So I think, when you were younger, you used to just like create for no reason, make like Play-Doh sculptures and draw and color, and it didn't really have a purpose. It certainly wasn't making you money. You weren't necessarily going to share it with anyone. You just did it because it made you happy. And that's where my career started. The origin of my life began in San Francisco. I realize how many photos I have of myself that are just going to be like projected, which is so funny. But here's little Mari. The origin of my life was in this very creative city of San Francisco, especially at the time, 33 years ago. And I was born to really creative parents. That was such a privilege. My dad was a full-time musician until he died, and he started when he was a kid. And my mom worked in a boring office, but she used to be an art teacher, so she's really good at drawing, and she always helped me with that stuff. So I was surrounded by creativity as a little kid. I'm very grateful that my parents took me to the theater and museums and out at restaurants, and they had a lot of really artistic friends. But I think the sort of strange flip side of that is that I was surrounded by people who were so incredibly good at being creative, and I didn't really know where I fit into that. I was not born with like a paintbrush in my hand. I did not have that one thing that I ever really wanted to do, and I spent my entire 20s looking for it. I was not told I was particularly good at anything as a kid. I saw my dad, who was kind of a musical genius, and my mom, who was always good at art, and I didn't know what I was good at. This is how I looked most of my childhood. This was at my birthday party, and I was really, really, really sensitive, really emotional, and for that reason, I was really lonely. I remember when my mom's first observation of me as a toddler was, Mari is very emotional. She laughs when she's happy and she cries when she's sad. It's on my Tinder bio also, speaker bio. So I had this very rich inner world. I was exposed to a lot of creativity, a lot of different thoughts. I liked to read a lot. But for that reason, I was in my head all the time. I didn't have vocabulary when I was this age to talk about how I felt. And so I didn't really have a bridge between my little world and the bigger world. It wasn't until I learned how to write, and it was just like 5-year-old writing little stories and little poems, that I realized I had a tool to build that bridge. So writing for me was my way of getting from inside this very overwhelmingly emotional head to the outside world. I remember when I was like 3 or 4, like kind of very verbal, but still had these very overwhelming emotions. My dad took me to a music store, and there was this classical piece playing, and it was so touching that it made me start crying. And my dad said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "It makes me miss my mom." And I think what I was, with more advanced vocabulary, I could have said it makes me feel nostalgic, or it's really moving. But all I had was, when I'm sad, it's usually because I miss my mom. And she was just at work. She wasn't dead or anything. But that was how I articulated my feeling at that time. And that's the kind of thing that I was able to write when I was a little kid. Like, this music makes me miss my mom. And for me, that was my ability to kind of talk to the outside world from this very lonely place. This painting might as well have been a photo from my childhood. This is like the life of an only child, I think. You're just kind of surrounded by your stuff and looking at it all the time. So I was very aesthetically inclined from a tiny age, because I really liked looking at stuff. I liked observing. I liked drawing what I observed. I liked writing what I observed. So always just kind of looking at what was going on around me. So I had this love of writing, and I had this proclivity toward, art, but I never, ever, ever thought I could be an artist or writer or creative person professionally at all. For one thing, I saw my dad do it as a musician, and it looked really hard. It was not a romantic life. I saw that he was traveling all the time. He had a hard time making money. He hung out with a lot of famous people, but that didn't really mean anything. He did what he loved, but he really sacrificed a lot of parts of his life for it. So there was that. There was also that I graduated college during the recession, and I had majored in history, and I think it took me like 6 months to get a barista job. So saying that I wanted to be like a creative person full-time was like saying I want to be a queen or an astronaut. It was not something that was accessible at all. I felt like I had to be very responsible. And I also didn't come from like a ton of money, so I needed to support myself, and I didn't have the ability to just kind of do what I wanted and know that the net would catch me. But I think there was a deeper emotional reason for believing that I could not be an artist and writer. And that's that I always felt like creative people had this like trick to being creative that I didn't know, like a gene or like an outfit or something. Probably because when we Googled the word artist, this guy comes up. First search. I don't have like a crinkled tee or a hat or like a CD casually lying around. I wouldn't know where to get these canvases. I don't know what this type of painting is called. I felt like there was so much to being an artist that was just completely inaccessible to me. And same with writing. It just felt like a totally other world that I could not be a part of, despite really liking to do both of those things. I thought you had to be an artist before you started drawing. And this is who I thought I had to be. So I tried a lot of other things in my 20s. I was always trying to get to know myself better through my jobs and through moving around and relationships. So I think like a lot of us, I worked food service for a long time, retail for a very long time, up until I started doing this. I thought maybe I could use my writing in some sort of office job and have health insurance and be writing. I do really miss the insurance. I'm still writing. And so I worked at like different nonprofits and a law firm. I was an English teacher for a while, ESL. I was a dance teacher for a while. And I really liked fashion, especially men's fashion. So I wanted to be a men's stylist. That was kind of my dream for a year and worked really, really hard at that. I was also moving a lot. I was always thinking, like, if I just move to Baltimore, my life will make sense. I had a really significant move to Washington, D.C., which is not a place we think of as very creative. It has an incredibly rich creative history, music history especially. But at the time, it felt a little bit ho-hum. I moved there because of a relationship, and we promptly broke up, so I was just sort of there stranded and had to get a job. And what was so amazing about moving to DC is that it is a really career-focused city. So I had to get my act together. I remember going to a lot of parties, and people would ask me what I did, and I got a strong sense that they were identifying me with the job that I did. And I did not identify with the job I did. I didn't experience that in Chicago or Seattle or the other cities where I lived. But DC, it felt like your career is your identity. So when I went to these parties, I wanted something to say other than I work at this like nonprofit and then I work at a boutique on weekends and I don't really know what I'm doing. So I decided I wanted to say I was a writer. But if I said that, I sensed there would be follow-up questions like, what kind of writing do you do? So I decided to get a little writing job. I wrote for Paste magazine, writing articles about fashion for $10 an article, and you still had to like apply and send all these samples, and there were like many rounds to get this job. It was not easy. But it was the first time I was really sharing my writing, and I really liked that. It was the first time people who were not related to me told me I was good at something, so that was pretty great. And I also started fashion blogging just for fun. I didn't make any money, but I had a small following, and that felt really good to me. At the same time, I started a relationship with a hip artist guy to protect his privacy. This is a stock photo of hip artist guy. It's kind of accurate. And so I was like 27, 28 at this time, didn't really have much of my own identity, so I decided to take his. I don't think it was that proactive, but it was what happened. It was the default. He had friends who were artists. He was always going to cool artist things, cool artist restaurants, etc. He had a beautiful apartment. So I kind of like was on autopilot. You know, I felt like I don't really need an identity because I have him now. But then we broke up. And then a couple days later, my father died on Valentine's Day. It was a rough Valentine's Day. My father and I were estranged, and I did not expect his death to affect me as much as it did, but it really, really did. I felt like my identity at that point was sort of this like thin, colorful rug, and when the rug was ripped out from under me, I saw all the dust underneath that was my life. So I was single, which is not an issue, but I was heartbroken. I did not live in the city where I wanted to be living. I wasn't doing the job I wanted to be doing. I didn't have an apartment that looked the way I wanted it. Even my community didn't really reflect the kind of people I wanted to be spending time with. I didn't have a yoga practice. I always wanted to learn salsa, and I wasn't doing that. I didn't know how to play the guitar that was sitting in my apartment. I just felt like, wow, I have no foundation here. And that was the rock bottom time. Normally, I would have used writing to kind of get myself out of that place. I always used writing as a way to process my feelings and kind of gain ownership over my story. But in this case, I didn't have the patience to write. I was really depressed, and I couldn't imagine myself sitting down and writing a long essay. I was also very anxious. So I really wanted an easier way to process what I was going through at the time. So I decided to pick up some paint brushes, because watercolors seemed really soothing to me, and start drawing these little kind of vignettes about what was going on in my life at the time, and kind of journal that way. So this was half processing, just like writing down what was going on in my life, but also half empowering. I was taking control over my story. A lot of my story was really pathetic at that point. But by writing it down and me being the one telling the story, I was taking it into my hands. I was the one laughing at myself first. So I found that to be tremendously healing. I wrote down all kinds of stuff during that time, little texts that I got. And I was also very aware of, this isn't going to be the end of my story. This isn't my life forever. I'm 28, an old lady, yes, but I do have some more life to live. And I remember looking at a calendar. This was around March, February, when my father died, and I experienced this breakup. And I remember looking at the month of September. And I thought, I'm going to be a really different person in September. I was thinking about this little old nursery rhyme, you can't go around it, you can't go over it, you can't go under it, you have to go through it. And I thought, I have to go through this, so I might as well work on myself during this time. I want to be a different person in September. I want this to be a different story than the one it could be. You know, I don't want this to make me a worse person. I want this to make me a better person. So this is a classic kind of thing I was writing at the time, imagining myself in September. I thought maybe if I go through this and I start working on the parts of my life that I'm not satisfied with, by September I'll have a haircut, and maybe I'll have plants, and maybe I'll go to Portugal and I'll take some pictures there, and maybe I'll have a great love. I'm still waiting for that. But I had all these thoughts about how to lift myself out of it, how to how to get through what I'm going through now by imagining the future. And it wasn't just, the categories of creativity and love. It was like, I want my apartment to be better. I want plants. I want a pet. I want to learn how to dance. This is my mantra at the time: make your own life. I think for many years in my 20s, I had been waiting for my life to happen, and I used cities or jobs or relationships to kind of accelerate that. I also spent a lot of time in my 20s thinking, man, I wish I were the kind of person who woke up and made myself coffee and then did yoga. And I realized during this time, I am completely capable of doing that. Like, that is within my capacity. And I don't think that occurred to me before. I thought, I wish I were the kind of person who wore jumpsuits. Like, what am I going to do about that? So also during this time, I got a lot more motivation to write. I stopped fashion writing, and I decided to write about what was going on. I was really enjoying my little watercolor project, and I thought, I've always really enjoyed journaling and writing letters and writing about myself. That's like how I started writing in the first place when I was 5. So why not do that more? And so I started writing personal essays about heartbreak and grief and trying to find my dream job and how art was kind of lifting me out of this time. And I sent it to all these websites and magazines, and it went great. I got so many rejections that I made an altar out of them. I began incorporating my rejection letters into my watercolor project, and I would almost kind of look forward to getting a rejection because it was more creative fuel. So even to this day, I have my fireplace littered with all of these different rejections, but they were a direction to where I was going eventually. So this is a very creatively fertile time for me. Of course, it was very, very hard and very lonely, but I got to spend a lot of time doing things I really liked, like painting. Again, back to that childlike creativity, creating without a why. I was just splashing around in paint. It was fun. It made me happy. And so I decided I want to do this every single day for a year. I know, again, I'm going to be a different person in a year, so I'm going to commit to doing that and, putting a little happiness on the calendar every day. So I was also really inspired by Cheryl Strayed essays while I was going through this grief, and I remember reading one where she said the way you get unstuck in your grief is to reach. So I decided I'm going to keep reaching out, no matter if I'm getting these rejections, I'm going to put my drawings on Instagram, see what happens. So the work I was putting on Instagram, a lot of it was processing the harder things that I was going through, but a lot of it was just fun, and I made myself laugh. I did a lot of these little anatomies about, like real talk, adulting stuff. And it was the first time in my entire life that I had ever been called relatable, which was really interesting for me because I spent so much of my childhood and adolescence feeling so different from other people. I felt like I could not access what they were accessing in their worlds. I never thought anyone would be able to relate to me. It still surprises me to this day. And the fact that I was putting this kind of thing up and getting messages from like cheerleaders in Indiana and like cool art teens in Indonesia saying, I relate to this, it makes me feel less alone, made me realize we're all going through the same stuff. So might as well put it out there, connect to people. This was me selling art prints for the first time. I also sold wrapping paper with wrappers on it. And I was so proud of myself in my little overalls because I think I had sold like 3 prints for like $10. And I was surrounded by artists who really knew what they were doing. And I didn't feel like I belonged there at all, but I also didn't care. I was going through a really hard time. And so this was like such a bonus. Like, okay, I get to sell my stuff. This is great. So I sort of was feeling like I was actually making my own life and making my own self proud. At that same time, because it was such a creatively fertile period in my life, I decided to really commit to writing a book. I was getting rejections for my personal essays. I don't think I published one, but I thought, I don't care. I want to write this book. I want to write this story. I want to make people feel less alone. I was so grateful to artists who had done that. As I wrote here, I was very influenced by this album by Sufjan Stevens called Carrie and Lowell, which was about the death of his estranged mother. And it was the only piece of art, I'm sure there are many more, but it was the only piece of art I could find about losing an estranged parent. And I found that to be so much more comforting than anything a therapist could say. I just wanted to relate to a story. And I thought, I'm so grateful that he didn't, there's so many criticisms you could say, like this is so self-indulgent or whatever, but I thought, I'm so glad he didn't keep himself from doing this because I needed it. It actually saved my life. I remember listening to it for the first time on a walk home from work and just like sitting on a stranger's porch and sobbing because it meant so much to me. And I thought, if I can write a book that talks about growing up and these things that I've experienced and this way that I see the world, if I can do that for someone else, that's the dream. That would be so incredible. And I sort of starting to feel that through Instagram. Again, lots of rejections. Nobody wanted this book. These were from agents. I have over 40 of them over the period of about 2 years. It was exhausting getting these. I had a lot of people tell me, you're not famous enough to write a book. No one wants to hear, like, why would anyone read this random person's book? You need your stuff published. You need to be like, a bigger name, all this stuff. Or just like, like saying that my writing was too nuanced or too subtle. It wasn't like splashy, loud enough. But who can't reject you. Instagram. So I kept putting my stuff there. It was really an interesting time because I kept getting rejected by all of these agents and publishers, but I was doing really well on Instagram. I was getting all these followers. And it was just, word of mouth, and it was crazy. I never expected to get people following me, and so it was really, really special. I drew this the day I got to 10,000 followers because people were calling me an overnight success. And I said, well, it's like overnight plus 11 years. So I wanted them to see what else had gone into that, all of the years I couldn't find a place for my creativity. This was also a really interesting time of life because I was 29. A lot of my friends were getting really important dream jobs, and a lot of them were getting engaged. And neither of those things are on my horizon. I was still working in a boutique, part-time marketing. I had a job I liked, but it wasn't my dream job. It wasn't anything I could announce. We were still using Facebook back then, so announcements on Facebook were everything. You announce something big, and you get 400 likes, and all these people come from out of the woodwork, and it's like this really big deal. And I always told my friends, I don't have anything to announce. But when I did 6 months of drawing every day, I did have something to announce. And it didn't have anything to do with anyone else. It was all work I had done. So I remember saying, this is what I've been up to the past 6 months. I've done a drawing every day. And I felt so proud of that. No matter what else was going on in my life, I had that. And then a couple months later, I got a book deal. And this is my play on the engagement announcement. And that was by far the happiest day of my life. And I think it's the happiest day I will ever have. I think I reached max happiness, so it's over, but it's amazing. I wish I could bottle that feeling up. So my goals got bigger. These were my New Year's resolutions for 2016, a year after I started drawing. And I checked off every single one, but I still play with my hair. Every year, it's my resolution, and I just could not get it together. So here are some notes from the road from my first healing journey, creating without a why. Happiness is a discipline. We think that if there are things that make us happy, we're going to do them. But we know that doesn't always happen. Think about something you love to do, and think about the last time you did it. I always want to respond to that thought with today, Or people talk a lot about how making friends as an adult is hard, and it is, but I think we just expect them to show up in a parade on our doorstep. You actually have to pick up the phone. You have to go to parties. I know we all love to stay home these days, but you actually have to go see them if you want friends. Or you think that if you really love someone, you're going to naturally love them the right way, or you're going to naturally ask them about the things they want to be asked about, but it really is a discipline to do that. Same with happiness. So putting, drawing and writing on my calendar every single day was an assurance that year that I would make myself happy at least once a day, and that was essential for my healing. To have a side hustle without the hustle, without making any money, I think is essential for healing as well. It's a really great way to resist capitalism, to do something that makes no money. And I know that's very radical these days. Every hobby has to have an Etsy shop attached, but it really doesn't. Now that I do make money from my writing and art, I make sure that I take dance classes a couple times a week, and I will never be performing or anything. I do that only because it makes me happy. There's a lot of freedom in trying something new. I had no idea I was bad at art because I'd never done it before. So when I started putting my stuff out there, I was so bold. It was just here you go. And when you try something brand new, there's so much liberation in that. Just you don't have to be that good at it. You have no one to compare yourself to. I think that is very healing, and I think we should all be doing things that we're bad at. It's also, as you get older, time starts going really fast, and it's a great way to slow down time, because if you take, cardio dance and you're the worst person there, that hour is going to be the longest hour of your life. And then, as you guys probably know about creativity, there's no trick to it. There's no trick to being a creative person. I thought you had to be an artist before you make art, but when I was grieving and like very deeply depressed, I didn't have time to worry about that. I just had to make myself happy, so I would do anything. And then, as we also know, art is very connective. It's different from being an accountant. You know, we have this thing that we can show people, and there's an immediate connection there. That's really special. If that's something you do, it's an amazing tool, especially when you're depressed and you don't really want to see anyone. To make art and feel like you're connecting is just as valuable as friendships during that time, and it can certainly make people feel less alone. So that is my next healing journey. When I started kind of getting an audience, I started thinking a lot about creating as a public service, as service to others. So at this point, I think I had like 100,000 followers on Instagram. I had my book deal, and I was sort of forced to quit my job because I really didn't have time for it anymore. I don't think there's anything wrong with having a day job, and I wish that I still had one in a lot of ways. I think it can be very freeing. I think it can be really helpful to be a patron of your own art. But I had to quit, so I figured I was leaving the life of a 9-to-5 job for the life of a full-time artist and writer while I was writing my book. So I Googled most bohemian cities in the world and landed in Granada, Spain for a few months to write my book. This was a really exciting time. I just turned 30. I was loving life. That was taken like on my second day in Spain, and I was happy as a clam. I was about to spend a couple months in this amazing place, and I had this phenomenal routine made for myself. In the mornings, I would write and draw like in an outdoor cafe. This was like living the dream. And in the afternoon, I took flamenco lessons, and at night, I would meet other bohemians such as myself out for drinks and dancing and all that stuff. So it was a really, really lovely time of life and felt like this kind of amazing reward. Until I got autoimmune disease one day, which really kind of ruined the trip. I was diagnosed over about 24 hours with Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is an autoimmune disease that attacks the nerves in your body, beginning with your feet and hands and working its way upward. So talk about resisting capitalism. I could not produce anything for a couple months. I was in the hospital for a month, almost completely paralyzed, and my recovery took a very long time after that, several months. So I had just made these goals to write a book, and now my goals were to type a sentence. If you ever want to feel really productive, look at my goals from that time. These were the things I wanted to do so badly, and I remember making this list, and I don't even think I got all of those that week. My limbs and hands were extremely weak. My feet were pretty much useless. And I had to teach myself how to do all of this again. So I was still making art during my recovery. So I was in the hospital a month, and I had about 6 months of recovery as I gained my strength again and learned how to use my muscles. But I couldn't really draw like I used to. First of all, you might be able to see in this one, my hands were quite shaky. Both of these took like hours. This was for a freelance project that I had to finish. I had to complete my contract for that. But my heart was so, so deeply not in this, and not at all on the art I was making on Instagram either. I'd just been told that I was like this relatable person, and that my stories about dating and daily like adulting stuff were making people feel less alone, and now I felt like no part of me was relatable. I was living at my mom's house during recovery in the suburbs, and I wasn't seeing people. I was very lonely. It was by far the hardest thing I've ever been through, and I was dealing with a sort of form of PTSD, I think, and just hopelessness, absolute hopelessness. For me, I've been depressed a couple times, and the way that I would describe it is complete lack of curiosity in anything, just disinterest. And that's how I felt during this time. So I was trying to kind of keep up this Instagram account of like, I don't know, quirky, however people described me at the time, and I just didn't want to do it at all. So I thought a lot about my audience, and I thought about I thought about how I could serve them. I had this big audience at this point, and I didn't want to totally stop making things. That didn't seem like the right thing to do. So I thought, all right, what can I do during this time? I'll do what I've always done and write about what I'm actually going through. And I knew that I would lose people, and I probably did, I don't know, but the feedback I started getting was a lot more profound. And I realized that so many people going through really, really hard things. And maybe my issues were a lot less significant than theirs. Maybe they were more, but they were tapping into the same emotional landscape. So my work got a lot more serious. And it wasn't necessarily all about my illness, but I feel like I was accessing a part of myself I had never accessed. Because from my perspective, I feel like I had just opened a door in a house that you always pretend isn't there. And when I opened it, not only did I see inside, but I actually stepped inside. And I was able to come out, but I had still seen it. And so I was able to create from that place. Obviously, a lot of things in my life were still really insignificant and silly, but I feel like my public service at that point was to make use, dramatic, was to make use of a lot of the more intense emotions that I now had access to. So I started writing about heartbreak, and I started writing about grief in ways I had never written about it before. This is when I wrote about, I think this was a heartbreak. Gosh, they're all running together at this point. You know when you have a big bruise on your thigh and you accidentally bump it on the corner of a table and it hurts so bad you can't stand it? It's not the bump that hurts, it's the memory of the bruise. I think about this phenomenon when I feel like I'm overreacting or being too sensitive. It was just a bump. But I'm not crying about the bump, I'm crying about the bruise. This is another one about heartbreak. Usually when I break up with someone, I feel the need to reclaim songs, places, habits as my own, but I want you to always have 5:45 p.m. at 64 degrees on a late spring evening. I don't need to reclaim it, and it's okay if nobody else has it. If I'm with someone else and the clock strikes 5:45 and it's late April and the drooping sun is cooling the day and turning the sky lavender, I'll blow a kiss to you and go about my evening, remembering when the evening was ours. So I was getting a little more like intense than like, can you believe this guy like split the check? So, my work was changing a lot. I wrote a lot about my illness and what was going on that whole year of recovery. I'm still in recovery, but significantly better than I was at the time. And I was also writing about some really intense shit that I had never really uncovered before. And a lot of that had to do with my father, who we will get into in a second. So, healing journey number 2, notes from the road of creativity is an act of service. If you want your creativity to be in service of others, you can't think so much, how do people see me? You have to think, how do I help people feel seen? And that's so hard because we love our ego as artists. But it's really, that's kind of the maturing, that's like the arc of maturity, I think, is to help people feel seen. Certainly, these are notes to myself, but that's what I found. One way that I do that on Instagram is I always try to be kind of aware of what the messaging is at the moment about a certain topic. So, and usually time of year. So, for example, around Christmas, I'm aware that people are seeing a lot of really happy pictures of people with their families. So how can I help someone feel seen who is not feeling seen in that feed? I can talk about loneliness. I can talk about how this year is really, really hard for a lot of people, and I see you. One of my most popular posts is about Mother's Day. It was written during a time when I was seeing a lot of happy Mother's Day stuff. I have a great mother, and I haven't, experienced any trials of motherhood myself, but I was very aware that some people were not being seen. And so I wrote one that says, thinking of you and different people who might have a hard time on Mother's Day. And art doesn't have to make people feel good. I think this is something we have to keep in mind during this zeitgeist as well. I think a lot of people, when they're writing about hard stuff, and I feel this too, it's a very alluring mindset, is that you have to tie a bow around it. You have to leave people feeling better than they did when they came to you. But you don't have to. Inspirational art doesn't have to have a little jaunty message attached. A lot of things that people are going through that are really hard are never going to get resolved. And they're never going to have that bow. And a lot of editors always want me to tie up my essays with and then I found art or whatever. But that's not how it works. We know that. So art can acknowledge that reality. And that's really important. You're allowed to evolve. This is something I tell myself every day. When people start seeing something in you that they like or that they kind of know you for, it can be really hard to believe that you can keep evolving. But again, I think the arc of maturity as a creative person is to evolve with the times and evolve with yourself. And that can look like an overnight change. Totally fine. You are going to lose some people, but you might gain some other people. Or maybe you won't, but that's okay. It's way more important for you to be true to your message. That's what I think about a lot when I think, what is the responsibility I have? I have this big platform. What is my responsibility? How should I use it? And being true to my message is the ultimate responsibility I think I have. You can't be in service to people if you're trying to be like someone else or if you're trying to be like your past self. Service to others is bringing all of your authenticity to the table, whatever you have going on then. And you can teach people how to see you through doing that, but it's not really your responsibility what they think of you. I do think you have a responsibility to people's feelings, how they feel, but I don't think you have a responsibility to what they think. I get criticism all the time that my art is too depressing and I need to lighten up or whatever, but that's not going to happen. And so long as I'm not hurting people's feelings, I'm okay with that. There's other people who are going to feel seen. And my responsibility is to them. And the goal of sharing, really personal art and personal writing and anything that's using your full authenticity is healing. It's not vulnerability for vulnerability's sake. You can't be the queen of vulnerability. Brené Brown already is. She has that. I think it's fortunately very trendy right now to share what's going on, and that's great. But we shouldn't all be telling the internet every single thought we've ever had in our lives, because that's not healing. A lot of that is just kind of putting stuff out there and seeing where it lands. I have a lot of tests to do this. What should I share and what shouldn't I? And I have a lot of ways of kind of measuring that, but one thing I do is think, have I healed from this or not? And if I haven't, it's not time to share it yet. My third healing quest is one that I've done this year. So my first journey was all about making myself happy. It was super personal. It didn't really have an end goal. The fact that I wrote a book and I got Instagram followers is amazing, and it still hasn't sunk in, but that was not the purpose of trying to make art for the first time in my life. The purpose was to make myself happy. My second healing journey was all about how can I best serve my audience. This third one is going back to something very, very personal. And in this case, I didn't even share it through my art at all. So a few months ago, I started fancying myself, a year ago, around this time actually, I started sort of fancying myself a tortured artist. And we know that's a trope. We know you can be happy and make art, but it's a really attractive trope. A lot of our heroes are people who identify very closely with their suffering. Creative people are rewarded for it. A lot of creative people, I'm thinking especially musicians, are not really taken seriously unless something bad has happened to them. So it's very easy. We all know it's not right, but it's very easy to begin really identifying with the worst things that have happened to you. And in my case, I thought, well, yeah, I identify with them because I'm never going to get over them. I'm never going to really be able to deal with this stuff. I have always really, it's always been really important for me to address people's loneliness by being really honest about what I'm going through. But I think at a certain point, I thought that my sadness was what fueled my creativity and what fueled my empathy and what fueled my compassion. And that is not true. I learned that because I met my friend Ruthie Lindsay. She's wonderful. You can follow her on Instagram. And she had a very similar career trajectory as I did. She deals with chronic physical pain. And her story is, I am a person of joy who deals with chronic physical pain. Or I'm a person in pain, but I am able to experience this joy. And I kind of felt really similar about my emotional pain. I thought, I'm a person in emotional pain, but I'm able to have this life of joy. That's my story. And I thought that my wounds were really helpful in that. I kind of didn't want to get rid of them because then I thought I wasn't going to be able to empathize with people anymore. But Ruthie went on this crusade to kind of completely heal herself. It was the most amazing thing. She had been told that her pain was going to get worse and worse every year of her life. And then one day she thought, what if that doesn't have to be the story? What if I don't have to have that happen to me? So she enlisted every healer imaginable to her, and she's actually made so much progress, and it's been really inspiring to see, not only because her pain is getting better, but because she said, maybe it doesn't have to be this way. Maybe it can be different. And she would always tell me, healing is available for you. It is possible for you. So I went back to the greatest pain of my life, which is my relationship with my father, who I was estranged with for many years before he died. And I always thought, this is never going to feel okay because he's dead. I can't reconcile with him. I can't really do anything about it. I'm always going to feel this kind of abandonment. This is going to pop up in every one of my relationships, and they're just going to have to deal with it. I remember telling my therapist, I think I'm just going to suppress this. And she said, that's okay, but it'll probably pop up in other ways if you don't deal with it. And indeed, it did. All of us have a childhood wound, I'm pretty sure. I think maybe one or two of us got unscathed, but I have a childhood wound that says I am a person who fundamentally should be abandoned. That is my wound. And so whenever something happens that's really insignificant, but kind of taps into that place, every time I go on a couple dates and I'm rejected, or every time, even when I get mild criticism about my work, or someone's just indifferent to me or whatever, it hits that place in my soul. It hits that childhood wound, and it makes me totally overreact. And I don't love using that word because we feel how we feel, but it's not a reaction that is ordinate to what happened. I'm like a wounded animal. It really scares me. It's really hard for me to deal with. So I realized, this has got to stop. If I'm ever going to have a healthy relationship again, I've got to heal this part of my soul, and I can do it. This was Ruthie's little mantra while she was healing. Hurt people, healed people, healed people, transformed people, transform people. So I was still making art and writing at that time through this whole year, through this whole journey. And I thought a lot about, what kind of artist do I want to be? I want to be one that heals. I want to be one that transforms, but I can't do that unless I do the work on myself. So last Halloween, almost a year ago, I decided I'm going to heal, but I don't really know where to begin. So I did what a lot of us would do, and I enlisted a psychic, and I tried astrology, and I did my past life regression. I did all kinds of stuff. I did plant medicine, take that as you will. And I just used every healer who was available to me. I would ask my friends, who's helped you? Give me some tips, give me some names. And I just used everybody. And some of them were kind of helpful, most of them weren't. But the actual act of saying, I am going to heal is the thing that helped me the most. And I've worked on it every single day since then. I work on it every single day. I knew that creativity had to be a part of my healing because it always was, but I knew it had to be really personal. This wasn't something I was going to be putting on Instagram or writing about. I just wrote about it, but not at the time. And so I went back to my original method of creativity, which was creating ritual for myself. I think ritual is so important to creative people because routines generally don't work for us, but I think rituals really do. Rituals you can do any time of day. Rituals are how I've I've accomplished every goal I've done. I can't do all right, from 2 to 3, I'm going to write, and then this time I'm going to do this art. But I have rituals. When I make art, for example, I'm usually drinking some beverage, either tea or red wine is my personal favorite. And I sit down at the end of the day. It's a really intimate time for me. I light candles. I sit on my little yellow couch. And I start drawing, and it's my time with myself. It almost feels like a date. It's very romantic, and that's a ritual that I have. It doesn't matter what time I do it. It's always there for me. So I made a morning routine, which I do recommend for all creative people. I think having a good way to start the day is essential for kind of getting into our self-worth and reminding us who we are. So this is an Instagram story I made about my little morning routine. I bought a programmable coffee maker, and it was so loving of myself. I thought to make that coffee for myself every day, that's a way for me to show myself I am committing to myself, I am loving myself, I'm doing this nice thing for myself, and then I take a walk around the East Village where I live, which is my favorite place in the entire world, and it reminds me I live in my favorite city. I have access to all this inspiration and history and beautiful things all around me. I love visiting the daffodils. There's also a dog park nearby, so I like going there, and that reminds me of what I love first thing in the morning. Then I come home and I do this little thing I call anointing my hands. It's really just putting lavender oil all over my hands. And I ask anyone who will listen to me, please help me create beautiful things today. Please help me communicate clearly today. I ask that I will make people feel valued today. And if there's anyone that I can serve, help me serve them. Then I make an English muffin. It's so good. And my coffee's made for me. This is a really, really loving thing I do for myself. At this point, I'm writing in my joy journal, which is like a gratitude journal, but it's less pressure, I think, because I don't have to feel grateful. I just have to be happy. And so that's a way that I tap into my own happiness daily. What does this have to do with healing from abandonment wounds? It's choosing myself. It's me every day, first thing in the morning, saying, I choose to be with myself today. I choose to make myself, feel my self-worth today. My self-worth is not dependent on whether I'm accepted by someone today. My self-worth is all about what I'm doing. It's the fact that I've chosen to live in my favorite city. It's the fact that I have this magnificent career I'm so grateful for. It's the fact that I can eat food and make things for myself, and I have so much power to remind myself how worthy I am of all of these things. I also created another little ritual, which I do whenever I'm feeling really stressed or I'm feeling really frantic. I've been doing a lot of traveling this year, so I have to do this often. Slow down, find something to appreciate, and make sure, this is terrible grammar, the person I'm with feels valued in my presence. I could have phrased that a million different ways. So just, when you're in line at the airport, and you're so frazzled and your skin's dry and all of that stuff, slow down, take a second, find something to appreciate. That can even mean I'm inside or I like that person's suitcase, and make sure the person in front of you, whoever it is, feels valued in your presence. That gets you out of your own head, so that you're a little more, you're able to deal with, the chaos of life better, the possible ways that you can be triggered better. This is really good for kind of self-soothing trauma, really good for self-parenting. Slowing yourself down, finding something to appreciate. You don't even have to be grateful for it, you just have to appreciate it. And then making sure the person right in front of you feels valued in your presence. So as I was kind of on this big healing quest with all my Reiki and all of my rituals, I really fell in love with my art again. I think I had fallen a little out of love with it when I was going through my own stuff and finding, a lot of pain kept popping up. But I really felt like I was able now to observe my wounds and my pain kind of in this pond. And I used to swim in the pond, and I used to be right in it. And now I'm on a beach chair, looking at this pond of everything that's happened to me, everything that hurts me daily. And instead of being right in it, I'm looking at it. I'm writing about it. I'm observing it. I'm even admiring it for what it's given me. This is a piece that I wrote about the goal of healing. So after I did this whole year, I took a year off of dating. I took this whole year to just work on my own healing. And I felt like the kind of arbitrary day I picked for the end of that healing journey, I went on a date. And it was an amazing date. And by the end, the guy said, I'm not really feeling this. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going right back to where I just was. What is happening? I just did all of this work. So I wrote this about that. Why does it hurt if I'm still healing? That's something that I would ask of emotional pain, not physical. It's not confusing to me why my shoulder sometimes hurts years after surgery. I easily interpret the physical pain as a caring reminder to be more gentle there. But when I feel heart pain, years later, I immediately question, shouldn't I be over this? And after the healing work I've been doing, I don't feel pain anymore is not that goal or end result of healing. This pain has no effect on my self-worth is more like it. So during this time, I was able to make art about my pain from a really different place before. Like I said, it actually made me so happy to make art again because I wasn't right in the middle of it. I wasn't talking about identifying with my wounds. Now, I wasn't a person in pain who experiences joy. I was a person of joy who experiences pain. This was one of, I think, my most liked posts ever. I wrote a list of different types of loneliness. And it was so funny because I was having the best time when I was writing this. I was sunny, I was in San Francisco, I was loving life. And when I was done, I happily pressed post. And then I got all of these texts from my friends saying are you okay? Are you really lonely? And I said, I've never been happier. I'm in such a good place right now, but I was able to tap into memories and serve people that way. So, healing journey number 3, creating personal ritual. Some notes from that quest. Curiosity is the opposite of despair. So there were so many times when I thought I could never heal from the wounds of my childhood. And what got me out of that is thinking, I wonder if I could. I think sometimes, we get in this headspace about the world is ending and my life is ending and everything's so bad right now. What do we have to feel hopeful about? And I think it begins with saying, I wonder. I wonder if things could ever be different. I imagine things being different. I wish things were different. And when you're able to get into that spark of wonder, that is you resisting a place of despair. I think art absolutely must acknowledge the reality of life. And that is such an incredible power of art. Like I said, these albums that I listened to that really acknowledged where I was, that was more powerful to me than anything. But I think the best type of art, and I'm aspiring toward that, is one that sparks that imagination. I wonder, I wish, I imagine. A big part of our job as creators is to heal ourselves. Transformed people transform people. And once you're transformed or when you're just in a really good place, healing is a full-time, lifetime job, but you might have those moments of feeling just really, unabashedly happy. You don't have to feel self-conscious about that. People are happy. Make them some art. There's a lot of art for people in pain. And like I said, what healing often feels like is a lot of pain. I mean, I've relapsed so many times into this feeling of like abandonment and really, really low self-worth that I thought I healed from. It's going to be a lifetime journey, but not identifying so much with my wounds has been life-changing for me. And at the end of the day, of course, you're still allowed to be sad and have sad feelings. Something that I keep in mind when I'm doing all of this healing work is that I still have a memory. I still have feelings. I'm still going to get them hurt. So the healing work isn't about abandoning that part of your past at all. It's actually about bringing a lot more richness and texture to it so that you can sit and look at that pond and imagine what else it could be. This is one of the first illustrations I ever did. The people worth impressing are your 5-year-old self and your 85-year-old self. So another ritual that I have is to think about my 85-year-old self. And I think about what she's wearing, and I think about what she's surrounded by. I think about where she lives. I think about her memories. How would she think about this time of my life right now? What are the things she's most proud of? What are the awards she's won, even in her heart? Who are her friends and what do they say about her? What are the things that she really found to be the most proud moments of her life? And I try to work backwards from that. I try to give her gifts now so that she can be proud of me. And then I also think about my 5-year-old self. And I think about how lonely she was. And I think about how abandoned she felt and how abandoned she still feels. She's obviously still with me. I bring her everywhere. And I think about the journey I take when I go and visit her, and I hug her, and I tell her, I'm going to give you all of this stuff. I'm going to give you a beautiful morning routine, and it's going to involve going to see the daffodils and a really good English muffin, and I'm going to give you paints, and I'm going to give you a dance class, and I'm going to give you these friends who love you so much. So I highly encourage you to take journeys to your 5-year-old self every day if you can. Be with that person. They need you so badly. And give them gifts. Give them these things. This is a passage that has accompanied me on all of my healing journeys. It's by Cheryl Strayed, my girl. There are some things you can't understand yet. Your life will be a great and continuous unfolding. It's good you've worked hard to resolve childhood issues while in your 20s, but understand that what you resolve will need to be resolved again and again. You will come to know things that can only be known with the wisdom of age and the grace of years. Most of those things will have to do with forgiveness. Don't lament so much about how your career is going to turn out. You don't have a career, you have a life. Do the work, keep the faith. You're a writer because you write. Keep writing and quit your bitching. Your book has a birthday, you don't know what it is yet. So I encourage you all to keep creating, quit your bitching, and know that healing is for you. Thank you so much. I appreciate you listening. I think we have, thanks. I think we have like 10 minutes for questions. If you have any, I'm here. And I'll give you, I know like being the first one is terrible, so I will stand here. Oh, yes.
So I love how your font is so unique. Do you choose like specific letters to capitalize and try to be consistent with that, or what's the plan?
Yeah, okay, the question is about consistency in my handwriting. It's all over the place. How do I choose where to capitalize? It just comes out of my hands. It just flies out. I developed this handwriting when I had one of my least favorite jobs, which was at a bakery. And part of my job was to write the tags every day of what we had. And I got really sick of my handwriting in a month, so I decided to change it. And this is what it changed to. And now it's muscle memory. I know it makes people mad. I get comments all the time like, write more legibly, but I can't. It's how I write now. So yeah, it's totally just like free flowing. Sometimes if I want, this is a little secret, sometimes if I want like a little bit of a comedic pause, I'll capitalize all of the whole word, but that's pretty rare, but something you could look out for. Yeah. Yeah. How do you let people into your process, your healing process, without burdening them? You know, I am really grateful to have a really good community. And I think that's something that I worked on before I started this. I think of community as sort of like a little bag you pack if there's like a fire or something or earthquake, LA, like your emergency bag so that it's always there and it'll be there on days when you're safe and it'll be there on days when you're not. And so I think really cultivating those relationships when you're feeling great is essential, and then inviting people into that and saying, here's what I'm working on. Do you want to know more about it? But I also am all for hiring people. I go to therapy. I'm not the biggest, I don't know if therapy has helped me more than other things, but hiring someone whose job it is to listen to me has been really, really important. But I also feel like your healing journey should not be a burden on people. I feel like that's a very, like, I understand societally why we kind of think that it might be, but this is what communities do. It's what they've done for millennia, and we're just now, like kind of not doing that so much anymore. But maybe take little steps and just see, the receptiveness. And you'll be so surprised about who really steps up and who doesn't. That's something to keep in mind, too. And I always think that's really, really special when that happens, like someone out of the woodwork. Yes?
On the other end of that, what can you do as, on your team or at your workplace to create an environment that allows for that healing or allows for that creativity to come through that healing, whether it's you're a design lead or if you're managing others, or what have you done personally that you can open up that space in the collaborative process with yours?
Oh, I love that question. That's about how do you create that space for healing in a professional environment or on a team? How can you create that space for other people? I love that so much. I want to figure that out. That's actually a big part of what I'm thinking about now is I want to work in more like corporate environments and think about how to do that, especially in male-dominated fields, because I think that men need so much healing. But yeah, that's a great question. The only thing that comes to mind, that's an amazing question. I think the fact that you're asking it is like the answer. But I think doing it yourself, like being open to an extent about what you value and what you see in people. I think calling out strengths is incredibly healing for others. Giving them opportunities to show their strengths. I was so lucky. My last job that I ever had was in marketing, and I was so lucky to have this amazing boss who was very no-nonsense and super professional, but I think he saw things in me that I was really scared to bring to work. And a lot of it was creativity. And he would always say, I love the way you draw, and I'd like to incorporate that, or I love this, and these things that I didn't think I was allowed to bring into work. He would say, I love your colorful outfits or whatever, and just kind of lift those things up more. So I think, calling it out in different people and being an example yourself. And I don't know exactly what that looks like. I'm sure it would look different for everyone. But again, the fact that you're asking that I think is beautiful, and I really admire that. Thank you. Yes?
When you first started putting your personal work on Instagram, and especially if it was about like a certain person, did you feel like any embarrassment or hesitation in doing that? And if so, like, how did you handle it?
Yeah, how do I deal with writing about my life, which involves other people? How do I talk about other people in public? I don't anymore. I think there was a time when I did, but even then, I think it was always sort of an archetype or an idea. There was a time when I was newly dating someone, and or long-term dating, I don't know, it was like a year, and I wrote about him a lot. and I always thought he should be so flattered that I was writing about him so kindly. And he said, like, you got to stop writing about me. I don't like reading on Instagram first, what you could be telling me. And I think from then on, I just stopped. So now I don't. I mean, unless it was like 10 years ago. But even then, it's like, I'll take details, but I have a pretty big imagination. I don't think it's okay to write about other people, even though I did it in a book, but I think the story has to be about you. It can't be about them, So as many details as you want, or as many ways to kind of make it about your own journey and not about their faults or even their, like the good things about them, because that's not your story. So keeping it you-focused and then doing as much imaginative work as you want, I think is sort of the key to that balance, but I know it's hard. Did you have a thought? Okay, all right, great. I think we have like 4 more minutes. So, oh, I'm sorry. I've been totally neglecting you guys. Yes. Thanks for asking that. It's about this illustration I have up here that says becoming friends with your mind. So I think I wrote this while I was sort of on the upswing of my recovery from illness. And my mind was a very scary place to be. I was dealing with a lot of trauma and a lot of fear, very similar to what I dealt with when I was going through grief, which for me was so terrifying. It was like such a scary thing. I was thinking all these thoughts I'd never thought before. I had a lot of impulses I'd never had before. I wasn't familiar with my mind. I always felt like my mind was a very wonderful place to be, and it was filled with my favorite thoughts and feelings, and all of a sudden my mind felt like my enemy. And so really committing to working on, noticing just like, okay, that's a thought, that's a feeling. It's not overwhelming me right now. That's kind of a way that I was able to befriend my mind. But most of it was just going through that healing process until my mind wasn't so terrifying anymore. Because I think that was by far the loneliest thing. And also just, it's very scary. It's a very scary place to be, especially if you've not dealt with severe mental health stuff before. So that was through, therapy and the usual healing things. Thank you for asking about that. Anyone from over here? Yes? Mm-hmm. Yeah. That is a great question. That's a question about living in an expensive city, which aren't they all right now? Like they're all so expensive. I think DC was as expensive as New York, and San Francisco certainly. And so it's how to kind of make it by, and also, should you move to a different place? And I think that's all about what you value the most at a certain time of your life. But I totally get it, and I would never. I got so much bullshit advice when I was living in expensive places and making so little money. I've always, until I started doing this, always had like a few jobs, no free time, always working, and just to like get by. And it would frustrate me so much when my friends would get these like really amazing 9-to-5s where they actually got off at 5 and then they could just like do things, and they were still making really good money. So I've been there. I've so been there. It's really hard because I wouldn't give that up, I've met my best friends through the shittiest jobs I've ever had. I think because we were so miserable, we had to be like happy and fun, like have fun. So, there's a richness to that. And I think at the time, I was somewhat aware of that. And I thought, well, I'm not ready to give that up. I have a community here. So if I'm going to make compromises, it's going to be to stay here. But sometimes that's not worth it. I am constantly assessing my values, what's most important to me in life. Right now, my apartment, like many in New York, is about the size of this podium. And I have friends who say, oh, you could get like a mansion in Chicago. And it's like, well, I don't want to live in Chicago, so that's not relevant. You know, that's not, like, I know I'm not paying for space. So if you're thinking about, okay, what am I paying for? Am I paying for access to certain things? Am I paying for my community? Am I paying for the inspiration that I get every time I take walks? I think that's, that's worth it. But if you feel like you're paying for a dream that no longer is relevant, or you're paying for a job that you don't have yet, and you're just kind of like being there just to kind of like fulfill some idea of a version of yourself, that's probably not. But I know that's really hard, and I think everyone is in the same boat these days. Every city is unlivable, it's terrible, and I know I'm up here saying like, don't make your side hustle your hustle or whatever. I know that's very easy, but I really get it, and I think it's a constant assessment of values and what you're willing to sacrifice at any time. And just knowing that you're not alone in that. Like, everyone is dealing with that to some extent. So I know it feels very isolating. I've felt that so many times. And I've had to tell people, like, don't talk about your job around me. Don't talk about your money around me. I can't deal with it. But it's so common. It's so common these days. You have to sacrifice so much. So with you, heart is with you. That's all we got. Thank you again for coming. Thank you for your lovely questions. See you around.